You look at the heavy marble columns of a government building and assume the law applies equal justice to every citizen. In his 1975 book, Discipline and Punish, Michel Foucault describes a cold stone prison designed by a philosopher. A guard sits in a dark central tower, surrounded by a ring of bright cells. The prisoners never know when the heavy gaze falls on them. The inmates police their own behavior through pure paranoia.
That dark central tower was not just a theoretical concept for dangerous criminals in the 18th century. It is the exact blueprint of the massive administrative state running right above your head today. You felt this invisible gaze last April when you reviewed your tax return on a glowing screen. You worried that a single mathematical error would trigger a massive audit and ruin your life. The state relies on your fear. Justice is a myth.
The state does not view you as a human being with inherent rights and a beating heart. The government uses a cold mathematical formula to categorize your existence based on your net worth. They treat the poor as a dangerous problem requiring strict management. They treat the middle class as a massive field of crops waiting for the harvest. They treat the ultra-rich as sovereign partners, writing the exact rules of the massive game.
Grading the population begins at the absolute bottom, where the state tests its most aggressive control mechanisms. Managing extreme poverty requires the removal of basic human dignity. In his 1971 book, Regulating the Poor, Francis Fox Piven examines a welfare office in a crowded city. A tired mother sits on a hard plastic chair answering intimate personal questions. The clerk behind the thick glass demands proof of her rent, her utility bills, and her living arrangements.
The clerk does not ask these questions to lift the mother out of poverty. The clerk asks these questions to ensure the mother remains a permanent dependent on the tiny paper check. The state treats people with zero wealth as wards of the court. To receive the basic means of physical survival, you must surrender your right to absolute privacy. The state dictates what food you can buy and where you can sleep. The poor are prisoners.
You encountered a version of this control when you applied for a basic municipal permit to repair your house. You stood in a long line and handed your personal documents to a bored clerk holding a rubber stamp. You realized that you needed the government to grant you permission to alter the wood of your own property. You felt the cold reality of your absolute lack of leverage. The heavy building reminded you who owns the dirt. The government builds massive bureaucratic mazes to exhaust the people sitting at the bottom of the financial ladder. They know a desperate person lacks the heavy resources to hire a lawyer and fight a bad decision. The poor accept the terrible rules because they cannot afford the heavy cost of rebellion. The state keeps the safety net just high enough to prevent a violent riot in the dark streets. They manage the pain. Pain maintains the order. Punishing the poor maintains the physical order of the city streets, but the state needs massive amounts of raw capital to fund its endless operations. Extracting that capital from the desperate poor is a complete waste of administrative time. The state must look slightly higher up the ladder to find a massive group of people with enough money to steal, but not enough power to fight back. They need a massive, compliant herd to shear. Creating a compliant herd requires convincing the workers that their daily sacrifice builds a better society for everyone. In his 1998 book, Seeing Like a State, James C. Scott observes a 19th century forester measuring a vast, chaotic woodland. The forester cuts down the wild, tangled trees and plants straight rows of identical pines. The forester destroys the natural ecosystem to create a predictable, managed crop of timber. The complex wild forest becomes a simple wood factory. The government performs this exact same clearing operation on the modern middle class. When your net worth sits between $10,000 and $1 million, the state views you
as the straight row of identical pine trees. You possess a visible salary, a registered vehicle, and a heavily mortgaged house. You are a legible target to the massive tax collector. They know your exact workplace, your exact residence, and your exact earnings. Visibility guarantees the harvest. You stared at this visible harvest last Friday when you opened your standard corporate paycheck. You looked at the massive deduction box and watched a huge percentage of your daily biological labor vanish before it ever reached your bank account. You work the first 4 months of every year for the state without a choice. You fund the massive government machine while you struggle to pay for basic groceries. They own your Tuesday morning without asking. The middle class accepts this massive theft because the government promises them safety and a comfortable retirement. The state takes your hard cash today and promises to hand you back a tiny fraction of it when you are too old to work. They use inflation to melt the value of your heavy savings in the dark. The state borrows money to fund foreign wars and hands the massive bill directly to the working class. The government uses a clever tactic to ensure you never hold the heavy money in your own hands. They know that if you had to write a massive check to the tax authority every single month, you would demand a sudden revolution. They quietly drain your blood while you sleep, so you never feel the sharp sting of the massive needle. They engineer the extraction to feel normal. Comfort masks the theft. Milking the middle class funds the basic roads and the massive public schools. But as your wealth climbs into the tens of millions, the state realizes you are no longer a simple pine tree. You possess enough capital to buy a heavy axe and chop down the forest. The government must change its tactic from simple extraction to massive structural containment. They build an invisible wall to protect the ultimate rulers from your rapid ascent. Containing the ambitious millionaire requires the creation of a massive labyrinth that only the absolute elite can navigate. In his 1963 book, The Triumph of Conservatism, Gabriel Kolko details a secret meeting of massive railroad barons in the late 19th century. The barons beg the federal government to create a national regulatory commission. The public believes the commission will protect the common consumer from the greedy barons. The public is wrong about the massive goal. The railroad barons draft the exact regulations themselves and hand them to the compliant politicians. They design the rules to be so incredibly complex and expensive that no new competitor can afford to enter the massive market. When you reach a net worth of $10 million, the state treats you as a dangerous threat to the established monopolies. The government uses heavy regulations to crush your rising business. Bureaucracy acts as a shield. You felt the crushing weight of this shield when you tried to expand a small business across a state line. You hired an expensive accountant to decipher the massive tax codes and the endless local permits. You realized that you were spending more time proving your compliance to the state than serving your actual customers. The government forced you to burn your heavy capital on useless administrative friction. Your exhaustion protects the massive old monopolies. The state frames these heavy regulations as vital protections for the environment or the safety of the working class. The reality is that massive corporations possess entire floors of expensive lawyers dedicated to navigating the maze. The millionaire entrepreneur lacks the massive legal army required to fight a 20-year court battle against the federal government. The state uses the heavy rulebook to freeze the current economic hierarchy in place. The law kills the competitor. At this tier of wealth, the state no longer extracts your money through simple income taxes alone. They attack your massive wealth through aggressive capital gains taxes and heavy corporate audits. The government views your rising empire as a massive target for physical confiscation. They launch investigations and threaten to freeze your heavy accounts if you refuse to comply with their arbitrary demands. The state uses the massive legal system
as a heavy, blunt weapon. The rising millionaire fights a brutal war of attrition against the heavy administrative state. Most entrepreneurs surrender and sell their companies to the massive monopolies just to escape the endless friction. But a rare few cross the ultimate threshold into the realm of the billionaire. At this massive peak of wealth, the heavy rules of the game
The transition from targeted victim to sovereign partner happens behind closed, heavy oak doors. In his 1968 book, The Rich and the Super Rich, Ferdinand Lundberg describes a massive charitable foundation created by a legendary oil tycoon. The tycoon transfers his vast corporate holdings into the foundation to avoid the massive inheritance tax. The foundation is legally classified as a charity, but it serves a much darker physical purpose in the quiet back room. The foundation allows the tycoon to maintain absolute voting control over his entire industrial empire without paying a single dollar to the state. When you possess tens of billions of dollars, the government no longer treats you as a subject. The state treats you as a co-author of the massive legal system. You do not hire lawyers to read the law. You hire lobbyists to write the law before it reaches the floor. You watched this sovereign power operate on the glowing news last week, when a massive banking corporation paid a tiny fine for a massive crime. You knew that if you committed a fraction of that offense, the state would lock you in a cold metal cage for 20 years. The massive bank admitted guilt, and the wealthy executives walked out the front door with heavy bonuses. The law captures the poor. The billionaires do not fight the massive government. They merge with it. They place their former executives into the heavy regulatory agencies that oversee their exact industries. They fund the political campaigns of the compliant lawmakers. The state does not audit the billionaire, because the billionaire funds the massive political machine that controls the auditor. The ultra-rich use the government as a private security force to protect their massive global interests from the angry crowd. At the absolute highest tier of wealth, taxes become voluntary. The elite use complex offshore trusts, shell companies, and massive charitable vehicles to erase their tax burden. The state allows this massive evasion because the politicians rely on the billionaires to fund their perpetual re-election campaigns. The working class pays the massive physical bill, while the elite dictate the foreign policy of the nation. Wealth acts as a shield. The state treats the billionaire as a crucial partner in maintaining the grand illusion of the democratic process. The government needs the massive media networks owned by the elite to broadcast the daily distractions to the public. They work together to manufacture cultural crises that keep the middle class fighting among themselves in the dark mud. The state manages the theater, while the billionaires collect the heavy ticket revenue at the quiet back door. The ultra-rich understand that the nation-state is merely an administrative tool. They do not hold loyalty to a flag or a specific geographic border. They hold multiple passports and move their massive capital across the world with a single keystroke. When a specific government demands too much, the billionaire simply moves their heavy assets to a friendlier jurisdiction. The state cannot trap a man who owns the global map. Borders trap the masses. The massive architecture relies on the people at the bottom refusing to look up. The poor mother in the welfare office, the taxed worker in the cubicle, and the crushed entrepreneur all believe the government is a slow, incompetent machine. They are wrong. The state is a highly efficient, perfectly tuned engine of extraction and control. It performs its exact designated function with absolute terrifying precision every single day of the year. The illusion of the incompetent government is a deliberate, heavy shield. If you believe the state is simply clumsy and foolish, you will vote for a new politician
hoping to fix the broken machine. You waste your finite biological energy participating in a rigged game that was designed to absorb your anger. You vote for change, while the exact administrative state continues to harvest your daily labor. The ballot box pacifies anger. The true function of the state is to protect the massive property of the elite from the desperate hunger of the poor. The entire legal code is a massive instruction manual on how to maintain the current hierarchy. The government prints the money, enforces the debt, and punishes anyone who tries to build an independent fortress outside the heavy walls. The state demands your absolute dependence to ensure its own perpetual physical survival forever.
You cannot change this massive reality by standing in a long line and casting a paper vote. You cannot change this reality by writing an angry letter to a compliant politician. The heavy machine will not dismantle itself just because you figured out how the gears work. The men who own the massive board will never surrender their absolute power. You must stop asking the heavy warden for the massive keys to your cell.
The state is not a father figure designed to protect your human life from the cold world. The state is a mechanical farm that grades your physical existence by your absolute ability to produce heavy tax revenue. The extraction ends only when you build an independent financial structure that the administrative state cannot measure or confiscate. You must become a ghost in their massive machine to protect your own finite future. Safety is a lie.
The government will continue to harvest the massive compliant herd until the final drop of middle-class wealth is completely drained. You will pay the heavy price for their endless wars and their massive bureaucratic failures. Some rare operators learned how to build heavy walls around their capital and stepped outside the massive regulatory trap. They stopped begging the state for permission and claimed their own sovereign freedom, far away from the heavy flashing lights.
The source's character shared his deep knowledge only with those who stepped into the quiet shadows to look for the truth. Something on this screen is the modern version of that exact ancient act of seeking. Every massive financial extortion in your life followed from trusting the heavy state. This is one of those crucial moments where you choose your path. You stand on the seeing side.